Today we'll be exploring how to use Caddy to host a web server on a virtual private server. In the past, there have been primarily only two options for servers: Nginx, which I've been informed is pronounced Nginx, or Apache. Recently, I've come across Caddy Server, a new web server with modern features designed both for local development and ongoing deployment. One of their headline features is automatic support for SSL using Let's Encrypt, optionally configurable with other SSL providers. Let's begin by installing Caddy on our server. We'll follow their documentation to add their repository to apt and install their software. Now that we have it installed, we can explore some of Caddy's features. The documentation offers multiple ways of setting up a server, from configuring JSON files that can be uploaded to an administrative endpoint running on localhost, to creating a Caddy file similar to YAML, TOML, or other plaintext config files in the current directory. I highly recommend at least trying out one of the quick start examples. The one thing that the documentation fails to make clear is that a lot of the quick start guides focus on development features. Running the Caddy command as a daemon will block your terminal. Even specifying the start command, Caddy will not bind to port 80 or 443. This is why for deployment, we need to use the system service using systemctl. We can check the status of Caddy using sudo systemctl status caddy. So while we can see here that our web page doesn't currently load, we can certainly fix that by enabling the firewall. So we'll check if our firewall is enabled, which we can see that it isn't. So we'll do ufw enable, which will proceed. So we now see that our firewall is enabled, and now we need to allow ports 80 and 443 through the firewall, which are for HTTP and HTTPS respectively. So we'll do ufw allow 80/TCP and sudo ufw allow 443/TCP. Now with those, so we know that Caddy is running, so we can go ahead and edit the config file for Caddy, which is located in the following file path of etc caddy and capital Caddy file. So we can edit this. You will need root permissions in order to edit this, so make sure to prefix your command with sudo. And we see here that the server is only currently running on localhost on port 80. So we are going to go ahead and change this by changing this to our domain, which in my case is vps127.heliohost.us. And we're going to go ahead and save this. Now we can reload our Caddy instance using sudo systemctl reload Caddy. So we can see that we have reloaded the process, and we can now go back to our domain and refresh it, and we will now finally see our functional web page. Now it is worth noting that if I exit full screen for a second, it already has SSL as part of the setup process. So it has a certificate that has already been generated just a few minutes ago, and you are good to go. So with that said, you get a default web page that allows you to just make sure that your server is working. We can in fact go back here and change a couple things to make sure that everything is working correctly, and we are able to change that default web page. So we can start by going back to this config file, and we can see here that the default path is to a shared directory. So we can go ahead and change this by editing this to say the default path of /var/www/html. And in fact, we can say here, change this to say browse, and it will enable the file browser. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And before we do anything else, we're going to also create that path because it doesn't exist by default. So we're going to change /var/www/html. We're going to go ahead and create it. -p just creates all of the paths or all of the directories leading up to HTML. So we now have that. We can go ahead and reload Caddy once again, and we will see that this now displays a file browser. So the file path is /, so that's the root path, and we currently have no files here. So if we go back and we create a file, For example, create a text file, and just make sure that it works. So we go back here, we reload the page, and we now have our text file that we can see here. But these are just the basics of setting up a Caddy server, as you can use it to host a Node.js server, a PHP web page, an Angular React.js application, and so on. And while Caddy might not be as well documented as the 20-plus-year-old alternatives, it's still definitely worth trying out.